Community colleges are, the youngsters in higher education. And we're also probably more closely in touch with our deep servant mission than the other sectors. We haven't had enough time to get too self-centered. It'll happen if we're not careful over time. But I love working in a community college because we're still so deeply in touch with our servant ethic. We were created to achieve something in society, and we're serious about that. But one of the things that comes with that sort of adolescence and commitment to mission, that idealism, is a habit of thinking and speaking from anecdote and story rather than from evidence. And I suppose that's probably true of the rest of higher education as well. In the last decade or so, though, our sector has just moved by great strides out of the era of anecdote and into the era of evidence. Part of that's being driven by external calls for accountability, and there's nothing wrong with those. We need to respond to those and help shape them and be in the vanguard of demanding accountability of our public institutions. We are publicly funded, but more than that, we hold a public trust to achieve certain ends in society. Here's the simple truth. For many, many years, most community colleges were mostly about enrollment. Enrollment was king. FTE ruled the day because it drives the business model. And so the cultural assumption was growth is a sign of health, all growth is good. It didn't matter that large numbers of students who came to us never finished anything that mattered to them, as long as we had big numbers. And that's still there. Our funding models are still at least nominally enrollment driven, although they haven't been particularly funded in the last half decade or more. But and as a business outcome, there's nothing wrong with enrollment. But it's not an end in itself. It's a means to an end. And the real end is student learning and student progression to degree in a future that degree represents. And what's been very helpful to change the conversation from an enrollment-driven conversation to a learning and student success-driven conversation is evidence about what students are learning and how they're progressing through the institution, and how different students are progressing differently, for example. I think establishing the habit, the culture of using evidence to nourish all of our conversations about where we need to go in the future and where our practices are succeeding or failing has served Valencia well and needs to continue to do so. And the good news is the technology for managing that kind of evidence and probing more deeply this massive big data that we now own, not just inside our college, but across federated institutions like Valencia and UCF, connecting our data and probing deeply. What are the experiences at Valencia that seem to enhance learning at UCF? Or where do we think the problems that our students might encounter at UCF have their origins while they're at Valencia? So you can do much more systemic change processes. Evidence is the coin of the realm now, because in an era of very limited resources, it tells you where can those resources have the most leverage on your students' experience.